Good evening and welcome to the monthly Greater St. Louis Art Association's speaker series. Tonight, our presentation will be on airbrushing. My name is John Salazzo, and tonight's presentation is a general overview of the airbrush. I've been using an airbrush to create art for more than 40 years. The airbrush, at its most basic, is just the atomization of a pigment onto an accepted surface. There are many traditional uses for airbrushes and newer applications as well. Most airbrushes are broken into two groups, single action and double action, which will be explained. To understand what the device can do, it's helpful to know a little history about it. Some consider the golden age of the airbrush to be from the 1920s through the late 1940s. Let's look at some examples. Airbrushing was both an important tool for the Art Deco art movement of that era and for the printing technology of the time. Printing four-color images was just beginning to happen and had limitations. For publications, it was generally used as a simple graphic element for pop or to smooth out areas with elegant gradations. Commercially, it was also considered a time saver. Airbrush posters and advertising illustrations for travel and propaganda were especially powerful. This last image is an example of a turn towards the fine arts. When Man Ray exhibited it, he was ridiculed for using an airbrush as a fine art tool. Times have changed. As the photographic process and offset printing technology improved, the airbrush was looked at as old-fashioned. Then came the 1960s and 70s. Creative illustrators picked up the tool and used it for album cover work, posters, and magazine illustration. Instead of just a bold gradation or to enhance an illustration, it was now being used to create 100% of the visual. As a commercial illustrator, Charles White III was a leader in the field, creating both whimsical and technically tight illustrations. The airbrush also gained popularity with the new wave of photorealists led by Chuck Close and others. His paintings were very large and when viewed from a distance looked just like a photograph. He painted with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, very similarly to the way a photograph is made up. In the 1980s, he was felled with a mysterious disease that left him in a wheelchair that he still paints from, creating new forms of photorealism in both 2D and 3D. Another innovator in the 1970s was Don Eddy. He used just three colors to produce his artwork and worked a line at a time with small 1/8-inch circles overlapping each other to create the full color image. The Japanese of the late 1980s and early 90s had Sorayama, creating amazing reflective robots and animals for posters, magazines, and for private collectors. If you want to start airbrushing, understand it's an acquired skill requiring practice. It's a production, it's also a process, and it takes time. It requires investment in equipment and can be very frustrating. However, done right, the end product looks really cool. Using the proper paint to go through your airbrush is an important decision. There are many applications that airbrushing can be used for. However, this presentation will focus on illustration or fine art applications. Basically, almost any pigment can be put through an airbrush. If you can make the viscosity thin enough, you can airbrush it, although not all paint or pigment is recommended nor safe. There are several manufacturers of acrylic paints made specifically for use in an airbrush. They are available for purchase online or at your local art store. Additionally, watercolor and gouache paints are also good to use when thinned properly. Acrylic paint can be thinned with water or an extender, which makes the paint flow easier but does not reduce its vibrance like water would. Cleaning an airbrush is of great importance. It's the root of most problems that people have with their airbrushes. Paint manufacturers make recommended cleaners, but I've found window cleaner will work just as well. To mask out areas and hold back paint, you may want to have a stencil cutter and 5mm acetate for making custom masks, or commercially available templates to spray through to leave a shape or pattern. Store-bought handheld masking templates, a device to spray cleaner solvent into, and the all-important face mask. If you have proper technique, you won't be putting a lot of paint in the air, but a face mask is a recommended precaution. Airbrushing will adhere to most substrates. These are some of the most popular substrates to airbrush on. The airbrush has been with us for a long time. Basically, there are two types: single action and double action. Double action, which I use, requires a push down on the trigger to regulate the amount of air and a pullback of the trigger to release the amount of paint required for the scene. This gives the artist maximum control but requires a touch acquired through practice. Here are a variety of double action guns ranging in price from $50 to over $500. The hobbyist and infrequent user will be fine with a less expensive airbrush. However, the full-time professional will opt for the higher end. The Iwata airbrush is considered today's top airbrush. This exploded view shows the parts that almost all double action airbrushes have. You gotta have air to paint with an airbrush. Let's look at some options. Hobbyists will find some of the continuous pulse compressors a good fit. For small areas and short painting sessions, they will be fine. They are inexpensive but do work. The main problem is not drawing from a tank of air for smooth airflow and buildup of moisture due to condensation. The next step up are the commercially available compressors that can be purchased from any Lowe's or Home Depot. The main benefit is that these compressors have a tank to draw from and the pressure gauge to regulate the amount of pressure you want. The downside is the noise they make. Heavy users will opt for silent compressors. They are made for airbrush artists, and they are also made similar to a refrigerator compressor. Nice and quiet. They are expensive, but worth it. If you're a hobbyist, I recommend using a moisture trap and pressure gauge similar to this. If and when moisture builds up, it can and will shoot out when you least expect it and ruin your artwork. It's worth purchasing. Hard edge friskets are created by holding down or adhering a material to the substrate and spraying your color. It will leave a hard edge, which can be troublesome or elegant. Here are some brands that are available. They work great on illustration board or masonite, but no, they can pull up paint or illustration paper if not properly used. I've used clear contact paper for years with good results. By the way, these don't work well on canvas. For canvas, I use a laminate used in the large format printing industry for automobiles. Liquid masks, commonly used by watercolorists, can also be used to block out areas. However, be sure not to leave them on the substrate too long, as they can take up paper fibers with them. That when airbrushed can be problematic. Here's what some common mistakes look like. They can be caused by low air pressure, dirty airbrushes, split tips, bent needle tips, paint that's too wet, uneven pressure, or just plain bad technique. Practice and experience will help minimize these mistakes. I find that visuals are the best method to show the thinking that goes into the process of airbrushing a painting. Here are 3 examples that show the process. A little about myself and my artwork. In the late 70s, I received an excellent foundation in art and airbrushing from Rhode Island School of Design. My first job out of school, I was offered something similar to an airbrush apprenticeship program. One-on-one after work with a master who was a third-generation airbrush artist himself. And these guys were talented and good. It was concentrated and hard, but it taught me well. In the early 80s, I left the company to start my own studio. I did illustration work for major brands, did magazine covers, held a Disney license for a short period, and received a platinum album for a popular rock and roll album cover I did. The following are some of my commercial projects. When we moved back to the USA and then to St. Louis, after a couple of years in the UK, I wanted to create fine art that used traditional art methods and featured the use of an airbrush. I hoped it would keep me interested and enthusiastic for creating art through my retirement years. The following are some examples of my art. I thank you for your time. I hope you found this interesting and informative. If you have any questions about airbrushing or my artwork, please feel free to contact me via the email address below. Thank you.